In 1995, a solo backpacker vanished along Montana's Bitterroot Range. Search teams found his tent, his pack, but not him. Only one photo remained on his camera. A trail marker that didn't exist on any map. 29 years later, a buried trail camera is uncovered by hikers near a collapsed rock face. Inside it, the missing hiker's final moments and someone else watching him. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe if you're drawn to real-life mysteries, wilderness disappearances, and disturbing stories that unfold over decades. June 18, 1995. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, near Bear Creek Trailhead. The rain had stopped sometime after midnight, but the clouds still hung low and heavy, bruising the sky with streaks of ash. Beneath them, a lone figure crouched by a cracked wooden post. The trail marker's lettering worn smooth by time and neglect. He paused. There was no arrow, no blaze, just the carved image of a tree with a circle around it. Something not printed on any of the maps he had triple-checked before coming. But the path, it was real, narrow and overgrown, sure, but packed beneath his boots in a way that suggested history. It wound between black fir trees, deeper into the valley, where the fog swallowed all shape and sound. His fingers hovered over the strap of his camera, hesitating. Then he took the photo. That shutter click would be the last anyone heard from Simon Greaves. 2 weeks later, his tent was found 4 miles off course. His sleeping bag still zipped, his campfire cold. His backpack sat upright beneath a granite overhang, untouched. What of Simon? No trace, no trail, no sign out in the register. Just one undeveloped roll of film with a final image that made searchers uneasy. A path that didn't exist and a figure barely visible in the trees standing still. September 2, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, near Lost Horse Creek Overlook. The trail wasn't supposed to split. Leah Madsen paused, squinting at the fork ahead. One side curved upward, framed by thickets of elderberry and goldenrod. The other dipped sharply downhill into a dark corridor of pines. There were no trail signs, no blazes on trees, just silence, thick and humming with the kind of stillness that made her uneasy. Behind her, Mason adjusted his pack, the aluminum frame creaking. "There's nothing on the topo map," he said, wiping sweat from his temple. "It should just be a switchback, not a fork." Leah frowned. She had planned this hike down to the mile, a 3-day loop through the bitter backcountry, off the main paths before tourist season ended. They had permits, emergency comms, bear spray. She wasn't new to this, but she didn't like surprises in the woods. The canopy shifted overhead as clouds drifted in. The sky had been bright when they left that morning, but now it was dulling, muted, like someone had dimmed the forest without warning. "We stick to the plan," she said finally, pointing uphill. "Back to the elevation line. No rogue detours." They pressed forward. The silence deepened with every step. No birdsong, no insects. Even their boots, which had crunched over gravel and roots all morning, now sank into a quieter, loamy floor. After a while, Mason asked, "Is it me or is this trail not trodden?" Leah nodded slowly. The path had faded beneath them. Less of a trail now, more of a suggestion. Shrubs brushed their knees. The air felt cooler, though the sun hadn't changed. And something else. A faint chemical tang in the air. Not unpleasant, not strong, just off. They came to a clearing. It was a rocky alcove shielded by jagged granite boulders. At the far end stood a weathered wooden sign, or what was left of it. Only the post remained upright. The plank itself had rotted through, fallen, and split. But something was buried beneath it. Mason knelt, brushing aside pine needles and damp moss. A rusted corner of metal glinted in the earth. He tugged carefully. A rectangular box emerged, dented and caked in mud. An old trail camera, not a wildlife grade. This was older. Military maybe. 1990s, hinged metal housing, a cracked lens cover, and a faded sticker peeling off the side. Property of U.S. Forest Service. Leah crouched beside him. "Is it film?" Mason twisted the latch open. Inside, the housing was dry. The internal casing was intact, and there, lodged in its belly, was a 35mm roll, still sealed. Black plastic, Kodak branding barely visible beneath the dust. "It shouldn't have survived out here," Leah murmured. "Not for what, decades? Let's not celebrate yet." "Could just be sun-bleached moose butts and squirrels," Mason offered, half joking. But even he didn't sound convinced. The presence of the camera felt wrong. This wasn't a corridor for animal crossings. The angle faced into the woods, not out over a trail. Someone had hidden this here on purpose, and it hadn't seen daylight in a very long time. By nightfall, they had made it back to camp, the air cooler, the forest quieter than it should have been. Leah sat on a log by the fire pit, the film canister turning in her fingers like a worry stone. Mason was already digging out the emergency sat phone. "You calling it in?" "Not yet," he said. "But I'm texting Evan to see if the station in Missoula still develops this stuff. If it's intact, we'll know by tomorrow." The fire cracked and hissed as damp pine cones popped in the heat. In the shadows beyond their light, the trees stood impossibly still. That night, Leah dreamed of camera flashes in the woods. Not from her own hands, not from anything she could see, just the sound, the click of a shutter in the dark. Over and over. Then a voice low and close to her ear whispering a single word. "Turn back." September 3, 2024. Location, Missoula, Montana, University of Montana. Photographic Archives Lab. The smell hit Leah the moment she walked through the door. A sharp blend of vinegar, chemicals, and dust. A smell she hadn't experienced since high school darkroom class, where images swam to life under red light like ghosts surfacing from the past. The lab assistant, a wiry grad student named Evan Jasson, was already hunched over the equipment, carefully threading the ancient 35mm film onto the reel with latex-gloved hands. His face glowed under the overhead fluorescence, lit with cautious excitement. "I've only seen one of these old Canfield Trail cartridges come through here before," he said. "This one's in good shape, shockingly. No water damage. Looks like it was wrapped in wax paper too. That probably saved it." Mason hovered behind Leah, arms crossed. He hadn't said much since the drive down from the mountains, but Leah could feel his unease vibrating in the quiet. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It was dread. Evan glanced up. "You sure about this?" "No," Leah said honestly. "But we need to know." They watched through the glass as he closed the development tank and began the chemical process. The slow, careful dance of stop, bath, fixer, rinse. The room filled with a faint gurgle of fluids draining and cycling. 20 minutes later, the film strips hung on a drying line, dripping quietly. "There's content," Evan confirmed, peering at the negative rows. Images look dense, grainy, but they're there. He began scanning the negatives onto his workstation. One by one, distorted images popped onto the monitor. Green-tinted, foggy, marked by time. Most were innocuous. Trees, a stream, a rock outcrop with lichen patterns. The composition was amateurish but deliberate. Someone had been trying to document something or someone. Then the sixth image froze him. Evan zoomed in slowly, leaning toward the monitor. "What the hell?" The photo showed a narrow trail bending into dense woods surrounded by dark conifers. But that wasn't what pulled them in. In the left third of the frame, barely visible at first, stood a man, back turned, shoulders squared, standing at the edge of the trail in the shadows, unmoving, watching. His shape was indistinct, but something about the angle, the rigidity felt wrong. "Maybe it's just another hiker," Mason offered. But even as he said it, the words fell flat. Because in the next photo the figure was closer. In the next closer still, and then gone. 6 more frames followed. Empty woods. A shift in perspective as if the camera had been moved or dropped. The angle dipped, tilted, showed a blur of tree roots and pine needles. Then nothing but static. "That's the last exposure," Evan said quietly. The room felt colder now. The hum of the equipment was suddenly loud and oppressive. Leah stared at the figure in the 6th image again. "That trail, it's not marked." "It wasn't on the map." Evan nodded. "Not part of any official system. I can run it through GIS overlays, but it might be old, abandoned, or worse, unofficial on purpose." She turned toward Mason. "What was the guy's name from the 90s? The one who went missing up near Bear Creek." "Simon Greaves," he said. "Photographer, went solo, never found." Leah's stomach turned. What if this was his camera? They left the lab with a folder of printed images, still warm from the laser jet. Leah couldn't stop staring at the one with the figure. There was something about the man's posture, the way his shoulders jutted like he was listening or waiting. Back in their motel, Mason spread the photos out on the desk like a crime scene reconstruction. "Look at the timestamp," he said, pointing to the lower corner of the scan. June 18, 1995. 29 years to the day before they'd found the camera. Leah sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the window. The curtain swayed slightly, though the air conditioner wasn't on. "What trail was he on?" she asked softly. Mason didn't answer because neither of them knew. They had stood on it, walked part of it, then turned around. But the truth was they hadn't followed it all the way. Not yet, and something or someone might still be there. September 4, 2024. Location: Bitterroot National Forest, Montana. U.S. Forest Service Ranger Station, Derby. The old ranger looked up from the faded logs book, then down again as if rereading it might change what was there. Simon Greaves, he muttered, dragging a thick fingertip across the yellowed page. Signed in. June 17, 1995. Expected out the 20th. Never signed out. Leah and Mason sat across the desk, quiet. The office smelled like coffee and worn canvas. Forest maps curling on the walls. A mounted elk-head watching from above the door. Outside, pine trees swayed in a slow late summer wind, but the air inside the room was unmoving, heavy. The rare nameplate read K. Ward, a Vietnam vet turned backcountry lifer who had probably seen more wilderness disappearances than he cared to recount. We searched, he said, voice gravel thick. I was here then. I remember it. Full deployment, volunteers, helicopters, dogs, never found so much as a boot print after the second day. Closest thing we had to a lead was an undeveloped roll in his pack. Exposed to moisture, ruined. Yours is the first film I've heard of since. Mason laid one of the trail photos on the desk, the 6th frame, the one with the figure. Ward leaned forward. The light caught the deep folds of his face as he squinted at the grainy image. Where'd you say you found this again? Near Lost Horse Creek, Mason said, not far off Bear Ridge Trail in a hollow. The camera was buried under an old marker post. Ward didn't blink. He reached for a drawer and pulled out a laminated sheet, an archived topographic overlay dated 1992. He laid it beside the photo, tapping near the lower right quadrant. There was a ranger cabin here back in the 70s, he said. Fire spotter post decommissioned. The trail to it got closed in 85. Slide took out part of the switchback and we were underfunded that year. It was never reopened. Leah frowned but not erased. Never officially removed either. Some folks think that if a trail is not on current maps, it doesn't exist. But the forest remembers, especially the places we tried to forget. He stood, walked to a filing cabinet, and returned with a faded, wrinkled file labeled Simon Greaves, missing person in red marker. Inside were brittle printouts, a copy of his permit, and a photocopied driver's license. Simon looked young, mid-20s, with angular cheekbones and a quiet smile. The photo was black and white, the corners curled like a leaf left in the sun too long. There were rumors, Ward said finally, voice lower now, about that side of the ridge. Things people heard out there. One hunter claimed he saw smoke rising from a slope where there were no camps. Another swore he saw a figure staring down at him from a rock shelf. Never moved. Just stood there. Leah's voice was barely above a whisper. You think someone's living out there? Ward shrugged. I think the wilderness has corners we never fully mapped, and some things don't want to be found. By late afternoon, Leah and Mason were driving the winding mountain road back toward Bear Ridge, the truck's tires humming over cracked asphalt. A storm had passed the night before, and the clouds still clung to the peaks like scars. The light had that strange quality, neither gold nor gray, but something in between, like memory. They stopped at a turnout to stretch their legs, the valley unfolding below like a tapestry. Mason stood near the guardrail, arms resting on it, staring into the tree. You believe him? He asked. Ward? Mason nodded. Leah inhaled the penniless air. I believe the trail was buried on purpose, and I believe someone wanted to erase it or control who finds it. Mason turned to face her. You're thinking about going back, aren't you? She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Back at the motel that night, Leah laid out their printed maps on the bedspread. She marked the area the trail camera was found. Then the site of the abandoned ranger cabin Ward had pointed to. A thin line connected them, not from any official route, but a probable path, old and overgrown, hidden beneath decades of foliage. She traced it with her pen, a trail not on any map. Then she marked a third point, the photo with a standing figure. If her estimation was correct, he was near a known overlook above a box canyon, a blind spot in both drone and aerial search coverage from the 90s. Something clicked in her mind. Not a hunch, a direction. I want to follow the old trail, she said quietly. Mason looked up from his seat near the window. You want to disappear too? No, she said. I want to bring someone back. September 5, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, Lost Horse Ridge Trail. The forest was different this time. Not because the light had changed, though it had in that soft golden way late summer mornings tend to do. Not because the air was cooler, though it carried a sharper edge now, as if fall were watching from just over the horizon. It was different because now Leah knew what to look for. The same trailhead welcomed them with its familiar wooden kiosk and bear warning stapled to the corkboard. Same register box, but everything beyond it, every bend, every shadow held new weight. This wasn't a recreational hike anymore. It was an excavation. Mason said little as they climbed the first 2 miles in silence. The undergrowth rustled beneath their boots. Occasionally a bird would burst from a branch above, wings thudding hard against the stillness. They reached the split in the trail just before noon, the unmarked fork that had first stirred their unease. Leia stopped and crouched beside the faded tread. "No fresh prints," she said, brushing pine needles aside. "But this is still a path. Someone made it once." Mason pointed uphill. "This is where it gets sketchy." They moved slowly now, navigating between overgrown huckleberry bushes and waist-high grasses that hadn't seen boots in years. The trail narrowed, dipped, then rose again into a natural corridor of moss-covered rock. The canopy thickened, light dimmed. About an hour in they found the first sign. It was a tree, a massive Douglas fir with a distinct horizontal gash across its trunk about chest height. Not fresh, weathered, but unmistakably human-made. A trail blazed the kind used by backcountry rangers decades ago. Leah touched it gently. Still here, Mason scanned the area. So where's it led? A short descent followed and the landscape changed again. The forest opened into a narrow draw, flanked by cliffs on both sides. A dry creek bed curled along the bottom like a spine. The rocks were slick with lichen, but something else glinted among them. A strip of canvas. Leia slid down the slope and pulled it free. A fragment of olive-green tent fabric partially buried beneath soil and leaf litter. It tore easily in her hands. Nearby, Mason crouched over something else. A rusted pot, denting around the lip, ash staining the inside. And beside it, a charred log. Fire blackened long ago. "Campfire pit," he said. "Oh, how old?" He shrugged. "Could be years. Could be decades. The Forest Service doesn't clear abandoned camps up here." Leah stood slowly, heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and dread. This wasn't just a detour trail. People stayed here. They pressed deeper into the draw. By mid-afternoon, clouds had begun to gather again. A low wind rattled the branches overhead. The trail became harder to follow, not from erosion but from time. Logs had fallen across it. Shrubs had reclaimed the clearings. But every so often they'd spot another marker. A blazed stump, a small pile of stones, a rusted nail embedded in a trunk. Then the cabin appeared. It materialized at the far end of a slope like something half-remembered from a dream. Weather-beaten, crooked, half-swallowed by undergrowth. Its roof had collapsed on one side, and moss blanketed what remained. One window shutter still hung, swinging faintly in the breeze. Mason let out a low whistle. "That's it." They approached slowly. Leia stepped onto the porch, or what was left of it, and peered inside. The interior was stripped bare. Dust coated everything. A single iron stove sat in the corner, its door ajar, blackened from a long dead fire. Empty shelves lined the wall. In the far corner something glinted. She knelt and brushed back debris. A small square metal box hinged locked with a simple clasp. "Trail log," she whispered. "Or gearbox," Mason joined her. Together they pried it open. Inside, a compass badly corroded, a mild Dweed topographic map. The ink bled out, and beneath it, a small sealed envelope, waterproofed, folded several times. Leah opened it with careful fingers. Inside, a single handwritten note in shaky script. "If anyone finds this, he's not gone. I saw him. He was standing across the creek. Same place. 3 days in a row, watching, not moving. Don't follow the ridge. It doesn't come back." The note was unsigned. The sky outside had darkened now, and a distant rumble of thunder rolled across the range. Mason backed away from the cabin door. "We should head down," but Leah wasn't moving. Her eyes were fixed on the tree and beyond the clearing, where the forest grew even denser, and where the faintest path still seemed to snake upward toward the ridge. "Someone left that for a reason," she murmured. "Yeah," Mason said quietly. "To tell us to stop." September 6, 2024. Location: Bitterroot Range, Montana, northern spur, abandoned ridge path. The ridge was steep, not impossibly so, but steep in the way that discouraged casual hikers. The kind of incline that stole your breath and punished your calves, reminding you with every step that this wasn't a place made for comfort. They had left the cabin just after sunrise, daylight still sifting through the mist like smoke. Leia led the way, boots digging into the softened earth, her pack light, but her chest tight with anticipation. Every 100 feet or so, she paused, scanned the trees, looked for signs, broken branches, unnatural spacing, a footprint where the duff had shifted. She found almost none. It was as if the trail ahead had been swallowed. Mason followed in silence. He'd said little over breakfast, just a quiet, "You sure?" when she'd marked the direction on the map. She'd nodded and he hadn't argued, but now she could feel his eyes on her back. 2 hours in, they crested a false summit. The ridge plateaued briefly, revealing a narrow spine of earth edged by cliffs on both sides. Below them, the valley was a mosaic of pine, rock, and mist, beautiful and endless. To the west, thunderclouds were starting to gather. Then Leah stopped dead in her tracks. In front of her, carved into the side of a pine, was another blaze. Not the usual ranger slash. This one was newer, crude, jagged. 4 vertical lines and one across them like a tally mark. Fuck. Mason saw it too. That's not Forest Service. No, she said, it's a count. Of what? She didn't answer. They continued on. More slowly now. The wind had picked up. High in the canopy. Branches groaned. A squirrel darted through the brush, startling Mason into gripping the bear spray tighter. They were nearing Trian when Leah spotted it. A thin strip of faded nylon wedged between 2 rocks. She knelt. It was a strap torn from a backpack, moss-covered, sun-bleached, but still identifiable. Dark green. She ran her fingers over the frayed edge, heart hammering. This could be Simon's. Mason didn't respond. His eyes were on the ground just beyond her, where the soil turned strangely flat. Compressed. A campsite, he murmured. Old but used. Leah stood and followed his gaze. The area was about 10 feet wide, tucked behind a low rock wall. A circle of stones formed a primitive fire ring. Ashes had long since scattered, but buried in the soot. She spotted something glinting. She dug carefully. A belt buckle, tarnished but intact. Plain brass with the initials SG etched faintly on the underside. Mason exhaled slowly. That's not coincidence. No, Leah said. They both turned toward the trees just beyond the site. A narrow path, barely more than a thread, disappeared into thick underbrush. It dipped, then rose again, vanishing over the far shoulder of the ridge. It was where the figure had been standing in the photograph. They were sure of it. We go that way, Leah said. Mason hesitated. And what if we're not the first? She looked back at him. We're not. That's what scares me. They pushed forward. The ridge narrowed, the path turning uneven and rocky, bordered by steep drops on either side. As they walked, the forest grew eerily still. Even the wind seemed to mute itself. Every sound became amplified. The crunch of gravel, the rustle of a jacket, the occasional crack of a twig that made Mason flinch. Eventually, they came to a small clearing, a B-shaped depression surrounded by crumbling granite walls. In the center stood a structure, not a cabin, not a shelter, a ka nearly 5 foot tall, stones carefully stacked, dry fitted without mortar. At its base lay something unnatural. A strip of duct tape, a rotted shoelace, and a small rusted keychain flashlight. Leah stepped forward and ran her hand across the stones. The surface was cold, damp. Near the top, a small object had been wedged between 2 rocks, a weatherproof match container. She pulled it out. Inside was a folded note, handwritten, a different scroll than before. I saw him again on the ledge just watching. Never moves. The trail doesn't loop. Don't let it take you past the Chiron. Leah looked up sharply, scanning the cliffs around them. Nothing moved. No sound, no shape. But the feeling had returned. The sensation of being watched, like something just beyond the edge of visibility was holding its breath. She backed away slowly, her fingers clenched tight around the note. We don't go farther today, she said. We pitch camp here before dark. Mason nodded, his voice tight. And tomorrow? She looked toward the rising trail that vanished behind a jagged rock ledge. Tomorrow we find out where it ends. September 7th, 2024.